Do I know you?
No. No. But you doubted me.
I'm sorry, I have to go.
No need to leave yet.
But I'm late.
You are not content with the stories, so I was obliged to come. Be my victim. Be my victim. I am the writing on the wall, the whisper in the classroom. Without these things, I am nothing. So now I must shed innocent blood. Come with me.
I am from beyond. Listen, and all you desire will be yours. Welcome to Spider-Dan and the Secret Balls. Prepare for Prattle.
Well, Danny boy, and place to place the alcohol and from plant to plant, went down the mountainside. That summer's gone, when all the roses are falling. Dead you must go, this you must go, but I must buy.
Welcome to Prattle World. I am your host, the ever-amazing, ever-spectacular Spider-Dan. And in this podcast, I spotlight entertainment's best-kept secrets that a mainstream audience may find boring. And welcome to Danny B Movies, where my guest and I introduce or reintroduce the world at large to a cult film. And this cult film, you don't want to say the title more than 4 times because you just never know what might happen. Today, we are covering Candyman, Clive Barker's Candyman, a very unique horror film with a unique antagonist and history, and we're going to get all into it. And this was chosen again by the patrons, but suggested by my guest, Sarah Coyne, an actor and massive cult film fan. And she is here to give us the lowdown, the myth, the urban legend of Candyman. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. I think on the Candyman counter we're on at least 3, so and I've now said 4, so
All
we'll
right.
we'll see if we last the night.
Oh no!
Oh no! But yeah, so 1992's Candyman, pretty much as old as I am. So Candyman tells the story of Helen, who is a student studying urban myths. I think in the original story it's graffiti specifically, and she stumbles upon the myth of a character called the Candyman. Number 5. Candyman is supposedly a serial killer who has been targeting inhabitants of an area of Chicago, which is at the time is kind of going through a lot of gentrification and everything. Candyman is a huge kind of hulking figure with a hook for a hand, and supposedly if you look into a mirror, say his name 5 times, he will turn up and kill you. And is that the case? Yeah, pretty much that is kind of how it goes down.
And those are the rules. And yeah, you don't play by the rules, you don't get out. But yeah, it's a unique film. I was looking into kind of some of the original short story, and it was set in Liverpool, which again is quite interesting that it was transposed into the US and Chicago and Cabrini Green. Like Liverpool, is based and developed because and through the use of slavery. So it makes quite a lot of sense that they would move that over. But again, I think in the original, he was like a red-bearded white guy, the Candyman. He was this figure of, he smelled like candy floss. I think that's why he had the name Candyman. So it's quite interesting to see what the director Bernard Rose did to alter it and to make it into a totally new kind of story, yet still the same.
Yeah, it's a pity because I think in some ways it would have been amazing to see a kind of more mainstream film in the 90s kind of tackle a very kind of Liverpudlian story, especially because I imagine probably a lot of like mainstream American audiences particularly, that would probably have been their first introduction to kind of a Scouse accent, to kind of like what Liverpool was like at that time anyway. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think in terms of how race kind of then became such a big part of the film that we know and love now, and the fact that Liverpool absolutely has its own kind of links and history to that. So yeah, it's like you said, I think it was it was a good choice, I think, that Bernard Rose made to move it to Chicago and just kind of take those elements of it and just kind of obviously ramp it up. And then of course the 2021 version ramps that up even more because, you know, by that point it was more black creators at the helm.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely get into that. But when did you first come across Candyman? When did you first experience the legend, the film?
So believe it or not, so I mean, I've known about Candyman since I was probably in high school, and it was kind of introduced to me by a friend at one point who basically said like, "Oh, you wouldn't like it, it's got bees in it." Which, to be fair, I am someone that I am terrified of wasps. Like, to this day, just cannot stand the little fuckers. So I kind of just took that at face value and was like, "Oh yeah, I probably wouldn't enjoy it." Had it actually been billed to me as what it is much more of a kind of modern, dark, gothic fantasy, I'd have been all over it. And yeah, so I only really watched it for the first time properly maybe a year or two ago. And then obviously revisited it for this podcast. And like I said, just it was a little bit one of those moments where I was like, where has this been all my life?
I remember when you were suggesting podcasts, I think you listed things like Phantom of the Opera and I think The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which are influences on this as well. And I think you were like, "Oh, I like my tall, dark, romantic strangers." And I was like, well, yeah, this fits into that kind of vibe as well.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, like, in researching for this, I love that Tony Todd, the man himself, actually was quoted as saying he'd always wanted to find his own personal Phantom of the Opera, which, you know, as both someone that's a fan of that work and an actress, I completely understand that that sentiment. And yeah, and I think it's cool as well. Like, obviously, we'll get into the Tony Todd as well, but the fact that he kind of obviously had a bit of he created the backstory himself. So all of that. So I think it's clear that the makers of this, you know, just from the director, the cast and everything, and even the like Philip Glass, the composer, I think there is clearly a real sense that everybody kind of had that idea of like dark gothic fantasy in mind, and everybody was kind of aiming for that goal. So it's cool to see it get pulled off in that way.
Yeah, I was gonna say I had to mention the score at some point because I think the score is phenomenal and not quite what you would expect from a horror film. And I think that's obviously. And Philip Glass felt like he was tricked into doing this a little bit. He was like, he was sold this idea. He was like, "Oh, it's this, it's that, it's this, you know, gothic horror, you know, Phantom of the Opera." And then he realized, he was like, "Oh no, it's just a slasher movie. Oh, I don't want to be in this slasher movie. I don't want my music to be used. You know, it's not for that kind of thing." But weirdly, it works. And over the years, he has softened on it because he's like, "Yeah, actually, it's pretty good, you know." And it's not. And it's not yet your typical slasher. It's not got a high body count. It's not, though there are blood and guts and gore in it, it's more haunting, I'd say, more eerie or disturbing than, again, he's the writing on the wall, you know, he's the whisper in the classroom. It's not about, you know, yes, he does have a big bloody hook for a hand, but it's not really about that. And I know some people would call him a slasher villain, but I don't think I would.
I think it is very much that kind of gothic horror, you know, kind of like characters like Dracula or, you know, even like the Phantom, where they aren't actually in it all that much, but you feel their presence throughout, you know, kind of like, and the stories kind of go to such lengths to kind of create this kind of atmosphere and this fear around them. So I'd say it definitely fits more into that category than anything else. I wouldn't really say he's in the same kind of club as like Jason or Freddy or anything.
Yeah. No, I was going to say the same with kind of Pinhead. I don't put him in that kind of category either because he's more, again, these are like slasher villains that are very cerebral and poetic and Shakespearean. You know, there's biblical really, and you know, there is some talk about, you know, belief and the power we give to our beliefs and who we believe in, and you know, I'm sure other people have talked much in much more detail about it than I have. But you could see him as a kind of a Christ-like figure in a way. In some respects, he has a church. He has believers who've put these murals together. They've told the story, and it's in a sense it is maybe a cult or a religion, but it's playing with those ideas.
And like you said, with Pinhead as well, I think there is an interesting parallel you can make with those two characters. Obviously, both of them are Clive Barker, but even the Cenobites have that kind of pseudo-religious thing. Demons to some, angels to others. And for me, I think the thing that kind of links them both is the fact that they only come when they're called. Like, they're not actually out roaming the streets looking for victims or anything. It's a little bit of a kind of, look, if you want to mess around with that stuff, wire in, but just be aware of the consequences. So I think it's almost more of a, I don't know, like, they're not kind of villains in the sense that, like I said, they're not kind of actively villainous. They just kind of respond to, they respond when they're called.
In those original Hellraiser films, I love the first two. After that, I feel like it does kind of go a little bit more like they make Pinhead into a villain, and I don't think that's how he works at his best. But Julia is the villain in the first two films. She's the evil one. Frank and Julia are the villains, and they're the humans. They're the bad people. They're the real demons, if you want to, they're the ones looking for the excesses and the fantasy and fulfilling those desires. The Cenobites just perform a function. Again, you call, we came, and much like you were saying with Candyman, the dare is there for you to do it. It's an invite, and it's whether you accept the invite. And then if he is losing the power of that belief, then he's going to come and he's going to have to show his power. He doesn't want to. He doesn't need to. He needs that, but he needs that level of belief and legend to carry on, no matter what he has to do it. And he says, they'll say I shed innocent blood. He's saying that maybe they're not that innocent because they called, or they're looking for this. That's I think that's, again, so many levels to this. But I was going to say, I discovered this when I was a child. I want to say child, but I'd say like maybe teens, early teens, I want to say. And I was probably up late night looking, probably as a young teenage boy, I'm late night looking for boobies on the television. As you do. It's standard, unfortunately. And I came across this and I was like, oh, well, let's see. Maybe there's some boobies in this. There was not boobies. Well, there are boobies, but not.
There's a little bit of boobies.
There's a little bit of boobies, but it's not like sexualized or anything. It's just, she just happens to be nude. But it wasn't like, and to be honest, by the time it started, and by the time I think the Rottweiler's head came off, my family had Rottweilers as well, so it was kind of a bit, so it was like, oh crap. So it was quite full on. But I watched the whole thing. Like, I watched it from beginning to end. It's not, it's not a long movie, but I just remember it having such a profound effect on me. So much so, I never revisited the film until now. And it hasn't lost any of its power. So mythic and gothic, and it's elemental, really. There's something so profound about it. All the things you've already mentioned just come together so well. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's aged so well. Like I said, it's almost a shame that I didn't find it sooner, because it's always great to kind of watch films that you enjoyed when you were younger, and you kind of, as you get older, you're kind of able to kind of find the language to sort of realize what it was you have always appreciated about it. And I think this would be firmly in that category, because I just think I think it's just a beautiful kind of piece of work just looking at it. But I think the kind of themes that it brings up, obviously, unfortunately, are still very prevalent in 2024 as they were in 1992. So it's a kind of shame that means that it's still so profound now, but that's just the world we live in. But yeah, it's a fantastic film. It does kind of feel, it seems silly to call it underrated, because it feels like everyone that's seen it loves it. But I probably still wouldn't say that it's as kind of commonly spoken about a film as, say, your Freddy's or your Jasons, which is a shame, because like you said, I think it's just on another level to those films.
Do you think the film itself has taken on kind of its own urban legend, that people don't want to, like you said, be invited or go and seek it out because they've heard how scary it is, or how profound it is, or how terrifying or, unnerving the film is? Do you think people might be avoiding it for that reason, possibly?
Possibly. And I mean, there could even be the element of, because it touches on some very kind of real world anxieties.
Sure.
There is potentially that element that it isn't as much of an escapism tool as quite a lot of, I think there are definitely plenty of like slasher horror films out there that are a little bit like leave your brain at the door. And this isn't that. I think it is, like you said, a very cerebral film. And I think some of the things that it brings up, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable still. And I think I personally believe that's probably why there was a little bit more backlash to the more recent spiritual sequel, is what they called it, because I think, like I said, these themes aren't going away. And I think as it's a good thing, Black creators particularly are becoming more emboldened to talk about these issues. I think there are some people that feel like, oh, I'm being preached to, where it's like, no, but the original always had those themes.
Yeah.
It's just that now it's almost like we kind of need to be more heavy-handed with it because
people are, I think there's a lot more resistance to it now, so I feel like you do have to be more heavy-handed. Like, nobody complained about RoboCop being political, when it came out, like, and that's one of the most political, the strongest political satire I know of, really. And nobody nobody blinked, and then this, obviously there was a little bit of, I think there was concern about, again, this came out around about or a little after the LA riots and Rodney King and stuff, so there was a little concern. There was also some criticism by Black filmmakers of, unfortunately, this falling into some negative kind of Black stereotype things, like the the hood, so to speak, and the superstition and things like that. So there was some kind of big filmmakers like Reginald Hudlin and the guy who directed Devil in a Blue Dress. I'm blanking on his name, but they had some real misgivings about it, or felt uncomfortable with the subject, which is fair enough. Again, it's coming from white creators. Again, Tony Todd was fully involved in the creation and the development of the character and the idea, but yeah, there was still some misgivings at the time. But you are correct though. Like, I think one of the main criticisms I heard about before watching the new one was that, oh, it's too political, and I was kind of like, well, the original was fairly political as well. It's probably not as upfront and about it. It's more kind of leaning into the Gothic and classic kind of horror literature side of things. But it is there. It's 100% there. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know. I just think it's just an excuse for people to go, whoa, everything's whoa. Ooh. I'm just sick of that whole fucking argument. Really, because all art is political on some level, so you're either there for it or you're not. Star Wars is political, for God's sake.
Oh yeah, I could go off.
They're called stormtroopers, guys. It was really political. Even the prequels were like George Lucas's attempt to kind of criticize the Bush administration at the time. So you can't escape it. Even your fun fantasy films have some political aspect to them.
Yeah, well, I think fantasy in general and kind of all kind of, it's something that kind of gets brought up, I think, in the film when you first see Helen go to her husband's lecture and they're talking about urban myths, and it sort of brings up the idea that, folklore always has an element of real life anxieties, and that's how we kind of deal with things as people, as a society, as we create these stories to kind of try and make sense of it and contextualize it and find coping strategies and stuff. So yeah, of course it's ridiculous to kind of think that any piece of art or story is apolitical, because I mean, even something being apolitical is political in itself.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing to sort of judge a film on.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. Like, the film, ironically, the film is a reflection of, each of the films are a reflection of the times we live in. And unfortunately, not much has changed from 1992 to 2021, like you were saying. And obviously, Candyman is a reflection of ourselves. He's aristocratic yet brutal. He is, he is Frankensteinian as well. Like, we made him.
That's really good.
We create. We're the scientists. We're the Victor Frankenstein. We as a society have created him, not only through his tragic backstory, but also the urban myth and the legend. We've all played a part in it. Again, we see it's not just kind of, white families or black families that the Candyman attacks. It's everybody. Like anybody who invites him and invites the legend in is, you're going to be targeted, because you're putting doubt. Because that's the thing. If you do it 5 times, you're like, oh, I'm fine. Nothing's going to happen to me. I'm alive. It's not real. And that's when he comes for Helen. And I wanted to talk about Virginia Madsen in this. I think she is, again, incredible. Just as strong as Tony Todd in this. And Tony Todd only turns up 44 minutes in, like in this hour and a half film. Like, again, they don't rush him. They don't overexpose him. You get some monologues and you hear some of his voice. You see some bees and some other imagery. And you've got the guy impersonating him. I hear you're looking for Candyman, bitch. You've got all this sort of stuff. And again, it's as well, I didn't even realize, but I paused the film to go to the toilet. I realized I was already an hour in. I felt like it'd been on for 5 minutes.
Yeah, it goes really quickly, doesn't it?
It's so well paced. It's incredibly just well paced. And again, it could be like, I think, some horror fans, like you were talking about, the Freddy and the Jason fans, might be looking for like, oh, I want to kill, I want this, I want blood, I want gore. If you're looking for that, you're looking at the wrong film, like entirely. This is not that in any way. I remember kind of, again, I was kind of casting my mind back to when I was a child, like remembering what it was kind of about. And I felt, because I remember the backstory, because it was quite a visual backstory for me. It was quite kind of visceral. I remember that was the thing I recalled, because again, everyone's got their origin story, but that made me think it was more like a vengeful ghost kind of story, but it really isn't that. It could be, if you wanted it to, and I think maybe some of the sequels go down that route, that it's more like vengeful ghost story, gothic love story kind of thing. But yeah, coming back to it, I realized how much more the urban legend and the urban myth thing was, and the meta fiction of it, the living fiction of this character. I found that fascinating, really.
Yeah, just especially because, like we said, that is just something that humans do. We tell stories, and it is that idea of like, that is the best way to keep any kind of sentiment, any memory alive, is like you tell stories about it. And like you said, how those stories kind of develop and evolve over time. And so, like, obviously it stands to reason that if you were going to make more films, they themselves would develop and evolve and try different things, or maybe kind of branch out on that a little bit. And yeah, just kind of back to what you were saying about Virginia Madsen. Like, yeah, she gives a fantastic performance in this, like really so multifaceted. And what I really like about it is that she, for me anyway, she's allowed to be unlikable. There are lots of things that she does in this film which are not very, like, just not likable. She's quite manipulative. You see her be quite like strong-headed. People around her are saying, don't do this, this isn't safe, let's go back, and she just kind of chooses to ignore all of them. And I just find that really refreshing, in a way that, like, she's not some kind of like wide-eyed ingenue. Like, obviously she's very driven and she's very kind of passionate. And so there is lots to like about her, but there's also a lot you can go like, oh, what a bitch. But it's just great to actually see a female character from the 90s be allowed to be all of those things. And like, I guess you could kind of make the argument she's punished for it, but she's not really, is she? No. And I just think, yeah, and I think it's a wonderful performance from her, especially because you see her kind of play both of those sides. I think she's an interesting mirror to kind of Tony Todd's performance, and the fact that they both kind of toe this line at times between victim and villain. And it's great kind of seeing the switch from one to the from Virginia Madsen particularly. You see her kind of go from one to the other, and the halfway point where she realizes she kind of sees herself as other people are seeing her. And yeah, I think she's phenomenal in it. And like you said, she really does kind of carry this film, because obviously Tony Todd only turns up halfway through. So yeah, she really should get her flowers for this as well.
Oh, absolutely. And she, like you said, she's this. I think Bernard Rose said something. I think I watched a documentary on YouTube, and he said that sometimes the villain of the story is actually kind of the hero, and the hero is kind of the villain. It's not quite. It's a bit more morally grey, and I think there is that, because she's trying to make a name for herself. She's trying to. Her husband is tackling urban myths, and she's like, don't do this just yet. I'm working on this. I'm developing this idea. And then, like you said, the second she hears about this and she looks into it, and we have to talk about the bathroom mirror as well, which served kind of as the the inspiration. Cabrini Green was these kind of housing projects in Chicago that were put up and basically abandoned by Chicago. They were like, right, they basically created the ghetto, I think, as they say in the 2021 Candyman. And they put all these people here, and there was drug dealers, there was criminals, there was children, single mothers, old people, mentally ill. Everybody was in here, and basically there was a lady called Ruthie May McCoy, whose name is somewhat used in the original film because I think, is it Annie McCoy, the neighbor?
Yeah, Anne-Marie McCoy, I think.
Anne-Marie McCoy, yeah. So, and Ruthie May, it's Ruthie May something, I think. So they split the names over to two different characters. But she was an elderly lady who was, this is in real life, by the way, this is a true story. She was living in one of these apartment blocks. She was a paranoid schizophrenic. So she kind of would shout at people and mutter to herself and be quite confused. But she was getting help for that. She was going to classes. She was getting financial aid. And one night she called 911 because she thought someone was coming through her wall. And the police were like, because she was kind of muttering and she wasn't being very clear. I think they were talking, they were like, oh, they're really tearing it down next door, which I think they thought, all right, the music's on too loud and having a party and it's a disturbance. They sent someone over, they sent some police over and they knocked, they tried calling, nobody answered. A janitor came, tried to open the door with a key, didn't work. The cops were going to break it down, and they said, and the janitor said, "Don't do it because you might get sued." So they didn't go in. So her neighbor, which is a kind of the Anne-Marie McCoy character, she decided to call the building owner or the property administrator, somebody like that, somebody in charge of the building, and they went, let me get a carpenter to open the door and check. And they went in, they found Ruthie May McCoy dead, and she'd been shot 4 times. So what it was within, much like in the film, the small mirrors, you could remove them, and there was a small kind of entry point for the room. So it was created for maintenance, to help maintenance men get in and out quite easily. But somebody had realized you could get through and then get into somebody else's apartment. 2 men were arrested and charged with the crimes, but due to lack of evidence, they were let go. And it's and that's kind of what inspired it. I don't think they've actively said it inspired it, but there was 2 articles, I think, I want to say the Chicago Tribune or the paper. I'll put a link in the show notes, but that's the real story. So that this really happened to a lot of people, but hers was probably the most famous kind of incident of it happening and inspired the film.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like that quirk, I guess you could say, of how the houses were built is still kind of a thing today in modern day America. There was a TikTok series, I think, a couple of years ago, where it was the girl in New York found the same thing. And I think funnily enough, I think it was just after that I first watched Candyman, and that was straight away what I thought of. So yeah, it's just and what really struck me, because in the film they kind of discuss like a similar story, like when she's speaking to the cleaners, and I think what really struck me about it was it just feels like a tale as old as time, this idea of, like, you know, a woman reports something bad going on or feeling like she's being threatened, nobody believes her, and then it's only when it's too late that she finally is believed. And that in itself, I just think, is like, it's this kind of urban folklore, how we deal with certain things. You know, the idea that like something that on paper, oh, that sounds like a good horror film, like that just is what it's like for some people, and especially people sometimes who are genuinely kind of going through something really traumatic and they need help, and they're just kind of, it's just waved away by the authorities as, oh, you're making it up, or oh, you're exaggerating, and just kind of, again, something from the 90s that's as profound then as it was today.
Oh dear. No, I was going to bring up the TikTok because that reminded people of that story and of Ruthie May McCoy's murder as well. So yeah, and again, even though they didn't say, oh, by the way, it's based or somewhat inspired by this story, the names are in the film, so you it kind of says to me that it was quite inspired. But it's also kind of inspired by a couple of other kind of urban myths as well. Like Bloody Mary was the idea of, you say that the name in the mirror a certain number of times and she comes to get you. And then also like the hook the hook aspect is like the guy who, the couple are, canoodling, let's say, in a car somewhere, and they're like, is someone outside? I think I heard something. And then they drive away, and the hook is hooked into the car because he was just about to attack, and they've driven off just in the nick of time. So there's a lot of elements. I will say, I think I like the origin story, but the hook element just seems really weird. Like, why would you cut someone's hand off just to shove a hook in there?
Yeah, I agree with you. It kind of seems maybe a little random. I mean, like if I kind of had to think about, like, what does it maybe symbolize? I guess for me, it's maybe the idea that, like, because obviously before he, was brutalized and killed by these people, he was working as an artist. And so for me, I guess what I kind of took from it is it's maybe kind of, they obviously cut his hand off, replaced it with a hook. And, so the idea of taking someone's kind of like artistry and creativity, like their tool for that, and actually replacing it with something that's like brutal and rudimentary. Like, it's kind of, you kind of brought it up, the idea that Candyman himself is like, I don't want to do this, but I'm obliged to. And it's maybe that's where that kind of idea comes from, like the idea that, like, I don't want to do this. I'm not this person naturally, but because of the way you've treated me and the way you've made me, no, I will be that kind of person. So I that's my kind of take on it, I suppose.
My reading was, obviously this is a living urban legend, urban myth, and it's going to evolve and change over time, like storytelling does. It's a reflection of ourselves. Sometimes it's a morality tale, sometimes it's something to protect us or to make us think wary of things, like the Chinese hopping vampires, for example, and things like that. Like, there's all these kind of wonderful, like, weird and wacky myths and legends. But for me, like, it reminded me of the child in the film, the young boy in the film, because and again, like, hearing about it in school and people talked about it, because no matter how young you are, about these kind of horror characters and what they represent, and kids are, they tend to be more easily kind of scared and stuff. So it felt like to me that's something a child added onto it. Like, went, oh, it's not scary enough for you. Oh, he's got a hook for a hand as well. Oh, yeah, it's really scary, and he's gonna chop you up. So I feel like part of me thinks, like, the rest of it is kind of spot on, but that maybe somebody was like, it's not quite getting the effect that they want, the story or the tragedy of it. So they're like, oh yeah, big bloody hook as well, so that was me trying to kind of make sense of that, because otherwise I was kind of like, another thing I was wondering, I don't know how you feel about this. I quite like the Candyman lair, and we've talked about that a little bit, but what do you think of him sleeping?
I think what I kind of like about it is it does kind of humanize him in that moment, because you could make the argument. I've seen some people make the argument that actually Candyman is just in her head, and this is just Helen, after her concussion, just kind of having a bit of a breakdown, which I personally don't agree with. But I can see how that take could be made. But yeah, I guess it's just an interesting thing, because it does kind of bring it down to earth, and it does just make him seem like he's suddenly not this kind of imposing kind of, I mean, apparently in costume he was like almost 8 foot or something, big guy. And so to then just kind of see him like in his lair sleep. I mean, also that probably also has a little bit of a nod to Phantom of the Opera there, the idea of kind of like, sneaking up on him in his lair when he's kind of you just can't quite, that you shouldn't be anywhere near this person, but like you're kind of drawn to him anyway. And it's like, what do you think about it?
Part of me feels like he shouldn't be sleeping, because he kind of, again, it's you're bringing him to life. Your belief in him is bringing him to life. So my feeling is maybe he is in there, but maybe she's projecting him in there, or she's bringing him or imagining him in that form, and he's going, oh, you think I'm going to be vulnerable? Oh wait, no, I'm not. Or maybe that he shouldn't, he should be able to sneak up on her or appear when he wants, or maybe it's like, well, I don't know what, I can't remember what the term is, but when you see an object and you turn away and it's gone, is it like permeance, object permeance? Is that it? Yeah. So maybe like if she's not thinking about him or she's not looking for him, he's not actually there, but when she is, he appears. So yeah, I'm not sure, but I can see what you mean with the kind of, it's almost like Dracula in the coffin as well. He's there, he's vulnerable. Can we get him? Can we kill him? no, he's alive. No, you know. So I think there's a bit of that, but it just seemed a bit odd to me that he was just, you know. And again, he's in his full coat. It just seemed a bit silly. He's in the full coat and he's just lying there, just like, you
I
know.
know, I'd love it if he just had like his little house coat on.
He's got his jammies on. He's got his pajamas on. Loads of bees on them. Yeah, but apart from that, like those are my only real two kind of bits where I'm like, I don't know if those particularly work. Like when I came back to it, I was like, you know, as it started, I was like, I already love the music. I'm absolutely in the way that we're kind of looking down on this housing project. And again, it's like how white society is looking down on this area they've created. They've kind of purposely segregated these people from the rest of society. And we're like, and that's how Helen's looking at it as well. Like she's going, if I can speak to these people, I can get something out of them. I can get my thesis or my paper, whatever it may be. You know, she does have a black friend, and I think that's good, and she plays a good part, and I think she's great in it as well. Is it Casey Lemons or?
I was reading a kind of like, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I was reading an anecdote that supposedly Virginia Madsen was originally cast in that role, so I don't think Bernadette was originally written as being black, but then obviously somewhere in the casting they decided that would kind of be a good switch. Because I think you're absolutely right. I think it because we absolutely see that Helen as a character is a bit of a culture vulture, and you know one thing I kind of made a note of, like particularly with the kind of fact that she is quite at times is quite manipulative when she's speaking to people and stuff, is when she meets Jake, the little boy. Jake she asks Jake his name and he tells her, and then she just breezes straight past with just like, oh, do you know anything about it? She doesn't even introduce herself. She doesn't even kind of bring herself down to his level. It really does just feel like, I want something from you and I'm gonna get out of you by any kind of means necessary. And even the way that she kind of waves away, like Candyman isn't real. Like there's something I don't really like using the term gaslighting because I feel like it gets thrown around a lot. But there is almost an element of you're kind of telling him something from his culture and his kind of way of life. Like you kind of just swooping in and being like, that's not real, that's fake. Like that in itself could kind of be a loaded sort of idea. Like there's so many things you could kind of like read from and like take from like some of the interactions that are written in this film, whether or not that was the intention at the time. But I think that's what I mean. I think watching it now with the 2024 lens, it does just feel like there's lots of things about it that just go even deeper now.
And like you were saying, like she isn't likable. Like when she's at that business meeting and there, you know, and she's sat there, she's smoking a cigarette. And again, the guy is very smarmy, and he gives us the backstory. I think he's called Clive as well. I think he's
of course.
Yeah, of course he is. Of course.
Which is funny because I'm sure the smarmy art director in the 2021 is also called Clive.
You're correct. You are correct. So and she's like, well, we're going to bury you. Like completely out of the blue. She's like, we're going to bury you. We're going to bury you. We're going to, you know, blow your socks off with this new story. And he's like, oh yeah, they went down to Cabrini Green. He's like, oh, Cabrini Green. Yeah, I wrote a whole paper on it. How are you going to bury me when I wrote the book on this character? I wrote the thing. And then she sits there, and I will say, like, Bernard Rose hypnotized Virginia Madsen as well for this film, and I think in some ways it does help, like especially where she's being, because she is being kind of, there is a hypnosis element to the Candyman character, like there is with Dracula, the mesmerism and those moments where she's like, you know, I'm late, you know, and all this, and you know, it's absolute, and she can't close her eyes, the watering, and they're really, really effective. Like it's wonderful, though she did get quite uncomfortable with it after a while, and
yeah, I think she said it was quite an intense experience that she wouldn't have wanted to kind of replicate, which is totally fair.
Yeah, I don't blame her.
That was another great example of her acting.
Yes, yeah.
When I was watching it, because you're right. It definitely has a very kind of like, especially that first meeting with the real Candyman does have that very kind of like Bela Lugosi hypnotic kind of. It's almost like a seduction scene, and yeah, like I said, I think that's just one of the elements of Candyman that's so interesting. He isn't just he's not just a bloodthirsty monster. I mean, he's arguably not even that bloodthirsty, but there is this real kind of, like, you really do sense that he is genuinely pining for her. And yeah, I just think Tony Todd plays it wonderfully. But like you said, I think Virginia Madsen just does a great job. And the fact that she was kind of willing to be hypnotized to kind of subject herself to that, I think is, again, just another testament to what a great actress she is in that in that category.
I don't know if I don't know if we've talked about the plot necessarily, but
I don't think we've even
I think
started
we've just gone full steam ahead and just been like, Candyman's good, isn't it? Which it is, yes, absolutely. But yeah, the idea is Helen's studying urban myths, urban legends. She's trying to discover one and write a paper on one. She discovers the Candyman myth. It's linked to Cabrini Green and these kind of the holes in the mirrors and everything. So she goes down, she investigates. There's murders, there's all sorts going on. They're investigating that. And while she's investigating, taking the pictures of all the graffiti and the art and the imagery, which again is wonderful. Sweets to the sweet, which is a line from Hamlet as well. And we have all that, and then she gets a little too invested, and we discover there's a drug dealer who's calling himself the Candyman, and he has a hook himself and is using one, and he attacks her. And then he gets arrested, sorry. And then she kind of puts it to bed, but she takes the photos and was like, Candyman was never real. It was just this guy using the name, using the legend. And that's when he comes in. And during this kind of first interaction that they have, he then frames her for not only the murder, the beheading of a Rottweiler, which I don't think is an easy job for anybody. And and also the kidnapping of the baby Anthony as well. And she's framed, she doesn't know what's going on, and she's treated like absolute dog shit at this point because she's basically found quite literally red-handed.
Yeah, and I think what I found quite interesting about it is I feel like the film kind of deliberately shows you her interaction with the police before and after the fact. Like obviously when she comes in and she's been kind of victimized herself, this gang have attacked her, the police officer is kind of, I wouldn't say he's the warmest guy, but he's certainly much more kind of like willing to hear her side of the story and stuff. And you just see that like as soon as there's the implication of guilt put on her, and I mean, obviously what she's been framed for doing is obviously horrendous, but like you do just see this real switch in how she's treated by the police, by mental health officials and everything. I think especially when she's kind of, it's her and the female officer, and she's kind of being forced to kind of take her clothes off and stuff. And it's so cold, it's horrible. And I mean, obviously the audience were kind of at this point primed to be on her side. So we are kind of watching and thinking like, oh, this is horrible. It's so degraded, it's so dehumanizing. And I mean, I kind of wondered whether, was that a deliberate choice in the film itself to kind of raise this idea of, like maybe like, the idea that we obviously know now that, the Black community and people of color have a very understandably fraught relationship with the police and mental health officials. And was this kind of, maybe for a lot of white people watching this, was this their first kind of taste of, oh well, this is probably what it's like for a lot of people all the time, like not just when you've been framed by an urban mythical being.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I was going to say just that. I think is, no matter what she says, no matter what she tells them, no matter what situation she was in, they don't believe her, and they don't want to believe her. They don't want to ask her any questions. They're just like, did you do it? Tell us you did it. We caught you. You did it. She still gets off on bail though, surprisingly. Like, yeah, which I was like, I don't think somebody in the Black community would have been given bail.
Probably not. And I mean, to give Helen some credit, like obviously she's kind of like doing a lot of like appropriation and stuff like that. But I think it's quite nice that there is a line that she says to Bernadette after she's been attacked before everything kind of kicks off, where she kind of says something about like, oh, 2 women in this community are murdered, nobody bats an eyelid, one white woman gets attacked and suddenly case closed. And so it's kind of nice that there is that acknowledgement that is just kind of how it is, and sometimes unfortunately it takes it to get to that level before most mainstream kind of press or even the authorities and stuff will take something seriously. So it's a nice little kind of bit of dialogue that's a nod to that, I think. And also it just kind of helps Helen be less of a
and I think that's also why we get the kind of the cheating husband angle as well. I think it's to kind of humanize her a little bit more and soften her a little bit more.
I mean, like honestly, so many of my notes just say "fuck Trevor."
I'm a big fan of Xander Berkeley. I think he's quite an underrated kind of character actor. Him and Virginia Madsen, they do a lot of kind of voice work, and I'm a big comic book fans or watch a lot of the kind of animated series. You know, and Virginia Madsen, I think she played like Morgan Le Fay in the Justice League, and Xander Berkeley was Mysterio in the Spectacular Spider-Man. And they're just wonderful actors anyway. But like that's kind of a lot of my initial kind of, I'm like, I know that name or I know that voice, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's these guys. So yeah, it's nice to kind of see them in like a proper like big budget movie as well. Like, not that they haven't been in them, but it focuses on them in this. And usually in the other films, it kind of like to the side somewhat. So I really enjoyed that. And again, like, you know, he's a bellend from the start. Like, you know,
the writing's
like,
on the wall.
right, quite literally, he's the writing on the wall. Yeah, he's like looking at that student. She's hanging about. She's like,
who's literally called Stacy.
She's giving Virginia like a tepid handshake. She's like, "Who's that girl? What's she doing?" He's like, "You wouldn't dare think I would sleep with one of my
students." Don't worry about it,
students."
baby. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
But even then, like, I think honestly, me even kind of saying that, I think does a disservice to how Xander plays it. I think even that role kind of, you know, you could so easily just make that character just like a very kind of like two-dimensional, like, cheating husband. And again, I think it's another sign of how good the writing is that like there's enough you know, you can kind of see why Helen believes him in the beginning, and like, you know, there's a lot of kind of very kind of subtle kind of, you know, bits of like you know, manipulation from him going on as well. So you can kind of understand how she could just take what he's saying at face value. So yeah, I think he does a very kind of good understated performance.
Yes.
But certainly my reaction was still like, oh, fuck this guy, which to me is always a good sign that someone's doing a very good job.
Yes.
If it's kind of making me think, oh, I really hate this. If it's like eliciting that much of a reaction in me, that person's doing an amazing job.
Absolutely. I think he's kind of, there's a little bit of like misogyny like sprinkled in as well. Like you can feel a little bit coming from him, like, you know, like when she comes in, she's, you know, she's healing and her eyes getting better, and she's like, "I've made you a full meal, how are you, I love you, honey," and all this. And he's kind of a bit like, "Yeah, where have you been? I've been away. I've been at working. Why didn't you answer the phone when I was arrested?" You know, all this other stuff. And it's kind of, but he does love her. He does love her, because by the end, you know, spoilers, the ending, you know, he is calling her name. You know, he does.
Yeah, you can see that like he doesn't necessarily feel good about what he's doing. He's obviously still going to do it.
Sure.
But yeah, you can see that there's at least a kind of, like you said, that there is a clear affection still there. And, you know, like obviously, yeah, still very opportunistic of when he kind of decides to, you know, call it quits and everything. But yeah, I think that is what makes it interesting, is that like, yeah, he's a bellend, but you can see that like he's still a person, and he does obviously still kind of care for her in his way, I suppose. But like you said as well, just with the misogyny angle, you know, the fact that the professor who sort of, you know, wrote the book on Candyman, you know, the fact that he's very kind of, I can't remember what it is exactly he says to Helen and Bernadette, but it's very kind of sexual harassment, sort of like, oh, you know, there's definitely a kind of slimy like element to it there that he doesn't call it out, like doesn't kind of raise any issues, and okay, like gives a different time, but you know, just even little things like that you know, surely any kind of
there's definitely an energy of him being patronizing, definitely.
Yeah, 100%.
There's definitely that energy, and that comes across very well. And I did quite like he's got a great voice, that actor, and he tells that story in such a way. And again, we're focusing entirely on Virginia Madsen's kind of angelic face. I feel like she should have been more things, but then looking at her IMDb, I was like, she's in a lot all of the time. So, but I don't know. I guess this is her. She said she always wanted to do like a Christmas movie or like a holiday movie, and she said, you know, I didn't do a Christmas story, but I did do a Halloween movie in Candyman that gets played like every year. You know, so she was very, very happy with this, and I think previously she'd done a lot of films where it was like just the kind of standard damsel in distress. But I think you're right. There's a lot of complexity here. Was it Clive Barker that wrote the screenplay as well? Did he write the screenplay?
I think so, yeah, because I think because obviously he wrote the original The Forbidden, but I think he also kind of, yeah, like you said, rewrote the screenplay for it as well.
Yeah, and I think he adds a lot of that. And I've always liked his writing, and there's something about his work that always conjures such kind of wonderful, unique stuff. I'm a big fan of Nightbreed. Have you seen that?
No, but it's on my list.
Oh, it's good. It's really good. It's really, really good. And yeah, there's a lot of LGBTQ plus kind of allegory there for these creatures, in an underground society, being mistreated, being ostracized. There's a lot going on there, and David Cronenberg's the villain in it, which I love. He's
incredible.
He's brilliant. But yeah, I highly recommend that if you haven't seen it. I think you can get the director's cut, which is his kind of version, because it was kind of cut to pieces a little bit. Danny Elfman does the score, and I would describe it as Batman's score, but if he was a vampire.
Yeah, I'm sold.
There you go. Go and watch that. I highly recommend that for anybody if you haven't. It was supposed to be what he described as a horror Star Wars. It was initially planned to be like a trilogy of films, which didn't quite pay off, unfortunately. But yeah, highly, highly, highly recommend that. But yeah, I can't remember where we were up to, what we were talking about. I've completely lost
think
track
we still
now.
only got as far as did we get as far as okay, we're 2 scenes in, I think.
Yes, two scenes into the film. So we do have that meeting. So she comes out of the police station. She's had that meeting with Candyman. She's now been and then she's released again. And then as she comes home, she's looking after, well, Trevor's kind of looking after her. He comes in late because he was clearly sleeping with a student. And then Bernadette comes to visit. And then Candyman visits her again and starts kind of haunting her. And she starts kind of collapsing under his power and his presence alone. And Bernadette's at the door and she's knocking. And it doesn't end well for Bernadette.
Poor Bernadette. She deserved better.
She certainly did. And then she's arrested, but this time it's taking a bit more seriously, and she's sent to a mental asylum, and she's drugged up for like a month, I think. Like she's been there for a month, and she doesn't recall it.
Yeah, and it's horrible when you kind of see her at like the scene where they play her the CCTV, and she's obviously convinced that like, okay, but they'll realize that it's Candyman who's been there, and the fact that she just sees herself in the CCTV, so you see that kind of horrible moment of, oh God, like, could I have done this? And I mean, obviously, yeah, the mental health official who's speaking to her is just the right amount of like smarmy, creepy, kind of really enjoying kind of watching her squirm. And then, yeah, so we kind of see her kind of put the Candyman theory to the test.
Yeah. and he's part of her defense as well. He's like, I'm part of your defense. He's doing a terrible job of the defense. But I love that as well, that scene where he's kind of floating over her and, he's being lowered down on top of her. And again, like, I think there was a few more of the romantic scenes between them cut, because I think there was fear of the kind of interracial love, angering the wrong type of people, basically. So I think there was supposed to be a few more instances of that, which would have been interesting to see. But I think they kind of erred on the side of caution, with again LA riots and everything going on at the time.
Yeah, which is a shame because, like I said, I think one of the great things about both of them is I think both of them as actors really leaned into the kind of like dark romance aspect of it all. So yeah, that is a shame because it would just have been more interesting. It would just have been interesting to see that kind of excuse me. It just would have been interesting to see that play out a bit more. I did write down that the shot of him kind of, because I think he says like, come find me, and then he just gets yeeted out the window. It's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, it just kind of almost turned into a giant bumblebee himself and just flies out the window. That's the bit where it feels like a slasher movie. That's the only section where I'm like, this is like a proper slasher movie in this one particular section, just because it's like, and he's proper like right behind him.
I totally get what they were going for, but it just for a second, it's just very kind of like Peter Pan goes wrong, like what?
we can fly. Straight out the window. I quite like it that it's kind of like it's backwards as well. It's not like he just leaps out the window. It's just like he's almost like something's pulled him outside the window, which obviously it literally had done for the effect to work. But yeah,
it would have been great if it had been a full like Scooby-Doo kind of like flies out the window and it's just a Candyman shaped hole kind of left over.
That's a very Schumacher Batman image. I think Batman and Robin, they do that when he flies through the wall and it makes I think it's the Robin shape or something, and it's like, how did that happen? But yeah. And then she's on the run, and she again goes back to one of your favorite characters in this entire film, Trevor. And she finds, and this is where she really turns on the dickishness of her character as well. And it's the young girl, the young students painting the walls. Trevor's like, oh, I'm going to make you some food now, sweetie. And Trevor's like, oh yeah, I'm responding to it in a much more positive way than when Helen was with him. You know, he's like, oh yeah, and he's in his little his dressing gown, and she's like, what the fuck is going on? Who is this?
Like, especially when you're just like, it's been a month, Trevor, like, for God's sake.
Jesus. She's like, you knew I was never coming out. And it's like, yeah, well, and it's a really powerful scene, and it's called back at the end as well with, you know, what's the wrong, Trevor? You afraid of something? And she's like, you know, why don't you call the police? Call them. And the poor girl is just in absolute bits. You know, because
understandably,
because she is this woman who cuts heads off Rottweilers, so she's probably gonna end her. And Bernadette, again, it's an off-screen kill, but Bernadette's body is in absolute pieces, pretty much. Like, she's got this.
Yeah, so thinking, like, if that's what she did to her best friend, like,
exactly, what are you gonna get? And that's a wonderful scene again. And then Helen is like, because she realizes what she's turning into. She's like, because she's becoming the new legend. She's becoming.
It's so beautifully played, that moment of, it's like she kind of sees herself in that moment, and like you said, she kind of sees what she's turning into, and you just see how that scares her. So yeah, it's great to kind of see this real, like, kind of like heel turn from her, and then kind of like, oh no, I can't do this, and then it kind of switches again where she's still just like, because I can't remember, does she leave of her own volition at that point, because she's like, I've got to go, and
she leaves because she kind of realizes, because she's like, she takes the phone off her and then goes like, go on, do it, and then she leaves, and then Trevor like immediately grabs the phone and starts ringing it as she leaves, and then I think at that point she goes back to Cabrini Green again, I think.
Pretty sure.
Yeah. And then I think she goes to does she find the lair? I think she finds the lair at that point. And then we you know, have that again, this kind of, and the two actors, Tony Todd and Virginia Madsen, took ballroom dancing lessons together as well to kind of get that chemistry going. And I can kind of, you can kind of feel it, definitely.
I think so. I mean, again, just, you know, even just that when he lifts her up, like, it's just all so, like, you know, if you kind of, like, if you took away the horror elements, like, there's so much of it that could just play out like a kind of very kind of like dark romance. Like, you could almost see it on the cover of like a sort of, like, if Fabio had a hook for a hand.
Mills and Boone.
Yeah, Mills and Boone, that's the one.
Yeah, Mills and Boone, Wuthering Heights type thing. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think the romance works as well. Like,
it does. It's all like you said. I think they completely sell it, and I think they both clearly understood that was kind of arguably going to be the selling point. So yeah, I think it's like props to them both for obviously kind of going that extra mile to kind of really make that chemistry come across. Because yeah, it absolutely does.
And I think you can see as well the influence of like Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula on it, because it was like. Because again, it's the kind of reincarnated lover a little bit, because you have a look on the wall and one of the murals looks exactly like her. I would have been interested to see maybe an exploration of maybe like, because somebody is painting those murals, because at the end there's a new mural. So and
especially because obviously Candyman himself can't do it because he has a hook for a hand. So yeah, and I guess that's the interesting thing that the film kind of brings up towards the end, is that like you said, you know, Helen is kind of becoming the new legend as the film goes on, and so like obviously. She kind of gains her own congregation by the end.
I've just realized who it could be based on the 2021 film. That character could be that, because they're trying to keep the legend alive. Maybe they're doing the murals.
Interesting. I think it's a valid point.
Yeah, or maybe like there's like, I would be interested to see if there was like a film with a cult of Candyman, like there were believers, there were worshippers of some kind. Maybe that might be an interesting idea. to explore. Maybe if they do it again or they reboot it again, or there's something, maybe there's an element.
It feels
of
like
that.
that's the avenue it could go down if they do get to do more of them.
I like the idea in the new one that again he appears to different people in different ways, and that you kind of decide, the coat and the hook are kind of iconic. That was another criticism of the time, that the coat was a bit too much like a stereotypical pimp would wear. Like,
oh, interesting. I mean, it's funny as well because like I kind of found some reviews of people that didn't enjoy it, and there was somebody who said like, oh, Tony Todd swanning around in a big leather jacket like he's in the Matrix, and just like, oh yes, the Matrix, the only films that have ever existed apparently where someone's worn a long coat. Like, I didn't even think of that.
That was one of the kind of the negative criticisms. The screenwriters and the creators of the film did meet with the NAACP as well, because again there was around this kind of time the racial tensions were very fraught, and they were like, why are you creating a black boogeyman? Why are we doing this? Is this to scare white people? What are we doing? But they talked about it, they discussed it. I don't know how those conversations went, whether they approved, whether they didn't approve, whether they took on criticism, I don't know, but it was something that they clearly were aware of, and given the subject matter, they were handling it as sensitively as they could from a white perspective, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, props to them for that, definitely. And I think that in itself is kind of it's a whole other interesting conversation of the idea that like how people's attitudes to representation, I think, is something that's also constantly like changing and evolving and stuff. Because I mean, I think you see it especially now with like, might be getting off topic here, but like with gay representation, whereas like it used to be like, oh, why are all the villains in films gay, and like how that's a terrible thing. Whereas now it's kind of like, yeah, all the villains are gay. It's brilliant. Like there are people we stand. There is that kind of argument, I guess you could make about like reclaiming certain aspects, and
Sure.
like a black man should be allowed to wear a kind of jacket that looks like a pimp coat because it looks good. Like it shouldn't, like, even if it does have that connotations, like that's a you problem. I don't know. It's interesting because I can totally understand how in the 90s with that
sure
climate,
I can see the issues. I can understand the trepidation behind it as well, like, absolutely. But again, I don't view it that way. Again, neither of us are black, so I don't know how much we can really say on that or from our perspective, but I definitely don't see it in that way, and I don't think Tony Todd would have done it if he felt that it was representing something that he didn't like or respect or be okay with at the very least. I know he signed on contractually to the sequels that he wasn't a fan of, but that's another story entirely. Like, he helped create this character, he helped build the mythos behind it. So yeah, I imagine that's and I'm sure the other actors, Vanessa Williams and all the other actors wouldn't have been involved if they didn't feel like it was saying something profound about racial tensions.
Yeah, like you said, I think when Tony Todd was kind of so involved and was really going to be the face of this film, I completely agree with you. I think he probably would have. I imagine he would have approached it. It feels like for Tony Todd, this was his baby. Like if he really gunned for this role. Apparently, the fact that he really wanted to kind of like he wanted to make his own Phantom of the Opera, and so I think he probably will have put a lot of thought and considered lots of the elements of the character and his appearance and everything. So yeah, it does kind of feel like it would be very different if he was kind of if this was all designed like just from a kind of like white creative perspective and kind of put on him as an actor rather than him kind of taking some ownership of it. And also just on the subject of Vanessa Williams, like she's fantastic in this film, and the fact that
wonderful.
And the fact that they got her back as well for the 2021 version might be a spoiler. Yeah, phenomenal. I think that's it with this film. It just feels like everyone's firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, 100%. We find out towards the end of the film, so this is like major spoilers now, that Candyman is trying to kind of seduce her, entice her into becoming his victim, be my victim.
Don't threaten me with a good time, sir.
and again, it's weird because it's consensual. It's consensual. Like, he says, "Be my victim." He's not going, "You're going to be my victim." He's inviting her. He wants her, and she's going down that rabbit hole. And again, and she wants to find this child. The child is missing. There's shots of Candyman like looking over the child and, you know, waving the hook, and like I think the like blood drips onto the baby's face from the hook. I think there's a moment of that as well. But she's looking to find the baby, and she does find the baby, but then the Candyman grabs her, and then they end up inside this bonfire in Cabrini Green. And the little lad, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, the character's name.
Anthony.
And not the baby, but the
not the babies. Oh, yeah, Jake.
Jake, that was it. You're right. He sees Helen go in because she can hear the baby crying, and she has a hook as a weapon. And as she's climbing in, he just catches the hook going in, and then they all like ritualistically go out and set this bonfire. Now, apparently in the Forbidden, it's a Guy Fawkes bonfire night.
That makes sense.
So yeah, so it's not, maybe doesn't quite translate as well as that, but it kind of makes sense from what he believes the Candyman to be, and what they believe the Candyman to be, and if they want to, you know, free themselves of this curse on Cabrini Green, that's what they've got to do. Helen's in there, she finds the baby, but Candyman's waiting for her, and she's like, we're all going to die together, there'll be a new legend, you know, we'll live forever, we'll be immortal, infinite, eternal. And she fights back, and again, I think she can damage him because she believes now in him. Like, you know, that I think if you don't believe in Candyman, you probably couldn't hurt him or affect him physically. And I like that she's like, oh, I'm fully invested. I know he's real. He's fucked with me all this time. I know he's real. So I think that's why she can injure him and hurt him and, you know, break his heart in a sense. And she catches on fire, but she manages to get the baby out at the kind of the last minute and give it back to Vanessa Williams' character. And then after that, she's dead. Trevor's there at the gravesite, and then all of the people at Cabrini Green come back, and they are, in fact, they present the hook. They find Candyman's hook and throw that in the casket to kind of put an end to it, and to kind of thank her for saving the baby and saving them all in a sense, you know. And she's kind of learned that lesson throughout the film, that she started off at one point, and now she's made that full kind of not heel turn but face turn, I guess you would say in wrestling terms. And Trevor's like, look at the effect she's had on all these people, and then he's in bits in the bathroom, and then what does he do? He calls her name 5 times, and she comes, and she's got this wonderful like bald cap of burns on her head, which I love.
Kind of very like Cenobite, for want of a better term.
On the blue lighting as well, very.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely has that moment. And then she kills him. The girlfriend comes in, screams, and that's kind of the end of the film, I think, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it ends. And yeah, it is this really kind of like lovely full circle moment of, because yeah, like obviously she's been kind of, you know, she's obviously spent the whole film looking for this urban legend, and then obviously she becomes the urban legend. It's interesting because you don't normally, like, she's quite a tragic figure in that sense, like in the kind of like, you know, Shakespearean like Greek tragic figure. You don't normally see women in that role. Yeah, so it's a really nice way to end the film. But like you said, it kind of still has this like weirdly positive spin on it, just because you obviously see like the whole community show up at her funeral, and so there's an element that like she at least isn't vilified in the way that she would have been, in the fact that obviously she does do the right thing in the end. You know, she saves the child and everything. And you know, it's kind of so well played in the way that, you know, when she's leaving the pyre and kind of trying to get the baby out, and, you know, like Candyman's there screaming like, come back to me, don't leave me. And you're like, and you know, again, it feels so real, and you are really invested in that relationship at that point. But obviously, yeah, she has to do the right thing.
Absolutely. Was there anything else you wanted to mention? Any like trivia and other stuff at all? Because I would like to talk a bit more in depth about the Legacy sequel that we've discussed a little bit.
I mean, I'm sure everybody kind of knows about the $23,000 kiss at this point.
All the bees.
Not the bees.
I
think just one other note I had was that he has a line about the pain, I assure you, will be exquisite, and I think I just wrote that he and Pinhead should switch numbers.
Definitely. I love that. That's what I like about them. That's why I don't see them as kind of these slasher villains, because they're not. Most of the slasher villains, to a degree, are mute, minus kind of Freddy. But even then, he's quite cheesy. There's something poetic and kind of unique about these kind of characters and the way they come across. But yeah, couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, so yeah, Tony Todd had a very good lawyer and got because it was real bees, like the guy who worked on My Girl. Spoilers for that film, but bees are involved. Bees are involved at the end. And he was, they had like a dental dam there, so Tony couldn't swallow any of the bees. Virginia Madsen discovered she was highly allergic to bees during the filming of this as well, so they had to breed kind of younger bees so their stings wouldn't.
Oh yeah, they don't have as developed a sting, do they?
Yeah, exactly. So, but again, fair play to her. She's still doing it. Didn't stop her, but they had to have like an ambulance on site, and they had to have like paramedics ready. So yeah, but that all kind of worked out, and again, I think it's a wonderful kind of, again, something totally unique to the aesthetic of the character. I love the kind of the ribs and they kind of fly out of that and everything. And that's something unique as well. Like most of these kind of horror villains have some sort of like disfigurement, or some sort of like Pinhead's got the pins in, and there's something to them. But like it's a pure Tony Todd, and it's his performance coming through. There's no makeup, there's nothing. It's just that coat and the hook, and that is it. Like it's pure Tony Todd. And I played the new Spider-Man 2 game, and he plays Venom. He voices Venom.
Oh, amazing! Yeah, I've not played it yet, but I've heard.
It's so good, so good. I won't say anything else about it or spoil anything, but his vocal performance is phenomenal and fits that character so well. Bernard Rose said that the tale of Samson inspired so again, that kind of biblical element coming through.
Oh, I think there was one thing I was just going to talk about.
Go ahead.
Just in the introduction to him in the parking lot. There was just something about the because obviously, yes, like you hear him before you see him, and obviously he's like Tony Todd. He's got this like really silky kind of like, and it's funny that it is a very sing-songy kind of way that he says her name in the first instance. And there's just something I love about that shot of he's obviously stood quite far away from her, and you can just see that he's kind of far away, and you see how tall he is, and just there's something about the way his head's tilted up. I just love it. Like it's kind of there's just something about the position that he's standing that's just for me is like really unsettling. It's almost that kind of uncanny valley thing, because you just like there's something that looks quite unnatural about the way his head's tilted, and I just think that in itself as an image, it's cool how that is so simple, but it just has this feeling of this is not just someone dressed in a pimp coat. This is like there's something kind of supernatural going on. I think it's very, very clever.
So Virginia Madsen as well, I want to mention, she lived in Chicago. She's from Chicago, so she was very much aware of Cabrini Green and the area, and all the kind of stories. There was tales of babies being thrown from windows, and shootings and muggings and rapes, and all sorts of horrible shit. And again, actress who plays Bernadette was again the same, but they went to Cabrini Green. They filmed at Cabrini Green. They had to hire the gang members there so they wouldn't attack anybody or cause any problems. Like a lot of the outdoor shots and the hallway shots, they're all done there, or the entrances at the very least. But as they left, someone took a shot at the one of the kind of trailers. So there was a bullet came through. It didn't hit anybody, but again, it was very tense on set, very tense atmosphere. They obviously had to hire the gang because they didn't want them to, intervene or do anything or harm anyone. But yeah, so that was kind of, they're not only are they kind of performing it and telling us about it, they're living it as well. And they eventually did knock most of them down, Cabrini Green. I think there's a few of the kind of single row houses are still there, and I think they were used in the new film. But most of the high rises are gone, and they've been replaced by like big outlet stores and things like that. So here's an interesting fact as well. We learn in the sequel to Candyman that it's called Daniel Robitaille, the original artist, but Tony Todd wanted to call him Granville T. Candyman.
Why not?
Why not? Granville.
Yeah, I mean Granville, like Granville T. Great, like I'm sold on that, but yeah, I think it would have been far too on the nose to actually have him be called Candyman.
Yeah, He also wanted to give Candyman an eye patch, but people were like, nah, it's maybe too much, the eye patch.
Yeah, I think something about the eye patch and the hook for a hand.
Might have
Which,
been
I mean,
one too many.
I guess you could argue that could be an interesting, parallel in the way that, like, kind of them giving pirate vibes.
Sure.
Pirates also kind of utilized their kind of mythos to their advantage. Yeah, I think that might have kind of pushed it into the realm of, okay, this is silly now, to be fair.
Yeah. I think like you're an actor, I'm an actor, everyone has like an idea, and sometimes some people just go, maybe just pull it back a little bit. Just like,
you need somebody there to just be like, just rein it in a little bit.
Yeah, maybe, bring it down, bring the level down, just maybe not quite that. Or, I did do a play where I had to wear an eye patch, but weirdly, we had to, well, it was a director's choice, but he wanted us all sat at the background when we weren't on stage, like just sat in seats. I remember, like, after the first night, he was like, just take the eye patch off because it's really distracting when you're sat in the background with an eye patch on. I was like, oh, okay, fair enough. But apparently people were just looking at me just like, he's got an eye patch on.
That is the first thing I would be focusing on. Just like, why is he got an eye patch? Is he a pirate? Are they going to do the thing? Is he going to have eye injury? Like,
pretty much.
It's funny, just what you said there about like ideas and stuff like that. It does make me think of one review of the 2021 film that I really liked. Basically said that, it's got too many ideas for the kind of runtime, but there are far worse crimes a film could make than having too many ideas. And I was like, yeah, thank you.
I agree. One last thing before we move on. A blacksmith made the Candyman hook, but then he refused to sell it to the Bernard Rose because he realized it was a Clive Barker film and he was a fundamental and devout Christian man. So he refused to sell it. So yeah, he wasn't entirely happy with that whole. I don't know if he eventually got it. I don't know if what the situation was there, but yeah, apparently he was not a happy bunny when they found out. But not the first time that's happened, and not the first time we talked about something like that on the podcast. But why don't we talk a little bit about the 2021 version? I've just watched it recently. You've seen both. What did you feel about the 2021 version? I know we talked about it a little bit already.
I did enjoy it. And I thought what I really appreciated about it was that it absolutely took elements that the original 1992 film introduces, and obviously because this one had Black creators at the helm, I think obviously they were in a much better position to kind of take those ideas and really run with them. Probably arguably still there's more work I would love to see done there, and I'm sure there's more stuff they would love to do. As I said, you can never have too many ideas arguably. But yeah, I think elements like, I think we kind of talked briefly about the fact that in the 1992 version, when you have the professor telling the origin story, the film kind of seemingly deliberately doesn't show you any flashbacks. It's all just kind of focused on Virginia Madsen's response to it. And I love the idea that the filmmakers of the 2021 version kind of took that idea of, okay, well, we don't want to use conventional flashbacks. And so they kind of brought up the shadow puppetry. And obviously everybody went crazy when the trailer was released, and that was the kind of major element in it. And yeah, I think it's a gorgeous art form anyway, and it does look absolutely stunning in the actual film. But also I love it because I think it really is thematic in the sense of kind of just our primal instinct as people to tell stories. I think it's inspired, honestly. Yeah, what do you think of it?
I like it a lot. I don't think it's quite as powerful or mythic, or doesn't quite resonate as powerfully for me. I think there are some powerful ideas and some very powerful moments. I like the use of Candyman only being visible in the mirrors. I think that was very clever and a very unique kind of aspect. Again, it's kind of going into that maybe a haunted house kind of ghost story territory a little bit there, but I like that. I like that it is kind of a legacy sequel. It can continue on from what was previously established, the story. Again, they talk about Daniel Robitaille almost straight away. They talk about Helen Lyle almost straight away. They're like, it's not a reboot. It's not a recall. It is a direct sequel to that original film. And yeah, it's quite interesting that, again, like we were saying, that the camera is looking down in that original film. They absolutely flip it in this film. When they open, they're looking up, because it's like it's the artist. It's he's aspiring to be great. He's aspiring to be better from where he is. And then, Helen Lyle's character arguably is looking down and judging these people for believing these urban myths and this legend. she's being critical of this culture. So that was really interesting. He's an artist, like Daniel Robitaille. I like the reflection there. I did think some of the art stuff I felt was like, oh god, there's some really wanky artists in this, but a lot of them do. The one called Clive does get his comeuppance quite early on, quite humorously. But yeah, there's a lot here to again unpack and talk about. I like the idea of him having, again, this like we were talking about, the myth, the legend evolves, a different person adds another detail. That's why all these myths and legends and different religious texts have so many kind of, the continuity isn't straight. There's a lot of discrepancies. That's why, because we are storytellers and we always go, oh, well, let's add the hook for a hand, let's add this, let's make it a bit more saucy, all this. So I like that there's all these different versions. I think they call it the hive, and it is all white perpetrators on black people, crimes that have happened to them, tragedies that have happened to them, and it's how, again, like you said, we deal with those, or the black community deals with those tragedies, how to make some kind of justice or figure them out. I think the cast is wonderful. Toyona Paris, who again was in the Marvels by Nia DaCosta as well, which I very much enjoyed. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea,
Me
but
too.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. I had a lot of fun with it. I think there's a section in that film, I won't spoil it, but there's a section in that film that's probably in my top 10 Marvel moments, MCU moments. I'll let you decide what moment that is.
I mean, if it's anything to do with the works of Andrew Lloyd Webber, I was also a fan of that particular
bit.
It
is definitely that. It's that moment. It's 100% that moment. Again, Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
but yeah, I really enjoyed. Again, I think there are a lot of ideas, and I think it probably needed maybe another 20-30 minutes to fully explore them. I think it was a little bit, the ending was rushed for me, and I think the reveal of the villain is fine, but he goes from a seemingly normal guy to an absolutely wacky, insane character at the end. I didn't feel that trajectory worked as well. But yeah, in spoilers, we find out that the main character, Anthony, is the baby from the first film. So he's being groomed to be the new Candyman, because Cabrini Green have decided they do not talk about it, because they don't want to invoke him or bring him back or give him any power apart from this one person. And she moved as well. She moved areas. She said he wasn't born there. But he's the Candyman has still managed to get his claws in him.
Yeah, and I think that's a kind of interesting theme that is even present in the original one. This idea of just like you kind of can't outrun your past. America is built on this foundation of racism and kind of suffering and stuff like that, and it's kind of just baked into the facet of it's baked into every facet of American culture. And so the more you deny it, at some point it is going to bubble to the surface in kind of different ways. And so I think the film does explore that in an interesting way. Also just the idea that the kind of sad reality that the origin story that inspired or kind of created Candyman obviously in real life is far from the only example. And so it makes total sense, to the idea that, like you said, you would build on the mythos, because there's so many stories in real life that you could build on, these kind of stories of black people suffering at the hands of white mobs and stuff like that. I also think the story that gets brought up in the intro of the 2021 version is interesting, because it talks about the razor blades in the candy, which is, you only see it visually as an image in the 1992 one, but straight away I was thinking, oh well, that's one of the most classic urban myths that is still to this day. Every Halloween I see stuff about that, and so the fact that they kind of build on that element as well, like it does feel like a real love letter to the original as well.
Oh yeah, 100%. There's a reverence for it. I do think it's a little muddled, because we do see Tony Todd at the end, and then we have the Sherman character, and we have this. There's elements to it I really, really like, but I do think it kind of gets lost between, in a way you can't have a sequel to the original. So I think they were kind of like, but we don't want to lose a lot of that, or we don't want to go, oh, it's another remake. I think there's a resistance against remakes now, so I think maybe that's why. Maybe it originally was a remake, but then they were like, no, let's maybe tie it in a bit more. But I do believe it. Yeah, it's a little bit muddled. But again, the stories evolve, they change. They can be a story can be something to somebody else. I will say there was a real life Candyman serial killer, which I think this is somewhat inspired by. It was a white guy called, I think he was called Dean Corll, I believe. And he would bring young boys back to where he lived and had an accomplice, and he would give them candy to entice them. But that's as kind of it's very loosely linked, I think, to this. But also the idea of him being in the wall was again part of that. The mirror thing and coming through the walls was quite good. And again, it was that wonderful moment where Helen in the original is climbing through the mouth of Candyman's mural. There is that imagery there as well, and he's coming out, and again, he's not mentally that well, much like the victim in real life, Ruthie May McCoy. So there's a lot of ideas they're playing with. But yeah, I really hated all the pretentious wanky arty types in it. I was like, Candyman needs to get to all of these people because I fucking hate them. Get them killed. But yeah, I thought it was a fun film. Again, I think there is a lot of hate out there for it. I would like to rewatch it at some point. Just take it in again and maybe look at it with different eyes. And I think I watched it directly after the original, so I think that's probably not a fair comparison there either. But I think it does have a lot of merit to it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think obviously the original is fantastic and is I genuinely think in a league of its own. So yeah, it is kind of unfair. Like obviously a comparison is going to be there.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. But I think it is almost unfair to compare the two. But yeah, I completely agree. I remember thinking it was pretty good and kind of stood on its own merit. It built on ideas that the original kind of explored, and obviously it kind of feels, of course we want this story to have Black creators in charge of it, because it is ultimately their story. And I think the original is great, but it is still very much a white person's story. And supposedly because the author of one of the articles that talked about the mirrors was apparently approached by John Malkovich, and I think he was originally interested in producing like something based on the story. I don't know whether it was directly this film or just a story that was kind of based on it. The author, the person who wrote the article, basically said they weren't comfortable at the idea of this story having a white protagonist when it's obviously kind of in a Black neighborhood. And John Malkovich, rightly or wrongly for the time, kind of said like, unfortunately that won't sell. And I think there probably was some truth to that in the 90s in a way that I don't think that's the case now. And so, absolutely. No. I think it's good that obviously Nia DaCosta, Jordan Peele, we are seeing more and more kind of Black filmmakers kind of taking ownership of these stories and obviously building on them in the way that they couldn't in the 90s. And I think we kind of talked about it briefly at the beginning with this idea that the biggest complaint I've seen about the newer one is that it's too preachy. And I think for me personally, I feel like all that means is that the kind of elements of gentrification are just kind of ramped up to a 10 more so than they were in the original. But I wouldn't even say that the original, I wouldn't even say those elements in the original were like really subtle subtext or anything. I think it's pretty prevalent. So it just kind of feels a bit like, just because it's slightly more brazen about something that was already there, I think to call it preachy, I think is an unfair kind of criticism of it.
Yeah, again, the original was political. This is political. It's fine. It's baked into that story. There's no way you can avoid it. But yeah, I think there's a lot to enjoy. I think, is it perfect? No. But I think, like you said, maybe too many ideas, but that is not necessarily a bad thing. And maybe, another filmmaker or, maybe they can, explore one of those avenues or something in another one, or maybe some of the other things we've talked about, some of the other ideas. But yeah, I think it's. I've seen Candyman: Day of the Dead. This is fine. This is fine in comparison, So yeah, I do recommend it. But again, like you said, it stands on its own. The original, it's something completely unique, and again, mythic and eternal, and its power's never gonna go away. It's been over 20 years probably since I've seen it, and it still affects me. I still jumped 3 times. I'm not a jump scare person. The dog barked once, got me. Dog barked again, got me. And then when the hook comes through the wall, when Helen's not expecting it, comes through the mirror, that got me as well. So it's still effective. And I think that's probably because of the score as well. It doesn't telegraph anything. doesn't telegraph those moments where you're going to be scared. And that's why I think it's, still powerful to this day. Right. Anything else you'd like to say on Candyman before I go into any of the listener comments?
No, I think let's hear the comments. Let's hear what the people think.
Oh, we've got a few. Here we go. So Ria Carrigan, she says Candyman is one of my favorite films, whatever favorite means, and one of my top horror films. Virginia Madsen is a revelation in it and holds the whole film together. The storytelling within the film feels so real, an urban myth that would still be shared today and take hold of people's fears. There's something very primal and powerful because it's based in reality and highlights problems with society and very specifically American society that is still ongoing in 2024. Get Out, another one of my absolute favorites, wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Candyman. Specific questions. Do you have anything to say off the back of that before I go into Ria's questions?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about because obviously I'm a huge Jordan Peele fan. As a lot of people are, he's a very talented filmmaker. But yeah, I think it does definitely deserve that kind of credit that this kind of arguably paved the way for probably for filmmakers like Jordan Peele and Nia DaCosta to make these films that. Especially Jordan Peele, a lot of his, pretty much all of his films, are very much about the Black experience, and especially about the Black experience in Hollywood. It is brilliant that this film exists and kind of embolden those creators to tell these stories.
Couldn't agree more with that comment. As we've said, Virginia Madsen, I think, is absolutely amazing in it. And I agree with absolutely everything she says. So she has 2 specific questions. What's the creepiest bit in the film for you?
What's the creepiest bit? I mean, obviously, all the stuff with the bees. As someone that doesn't really like wasps, I'm just like, oh, the ick.
The bees.
But I mean, the bees. But I think I don't really know. I don't know if creepy is the right word, but certainly when Helen is going through the not the lair, but when she's going through Cabrini Green, when she's gone through the mirror and she's taking pictures and stuff, it's so atmospheric. And like you mentioned, there's that wonderful shot of her kind of taking pictures and she's kind of in the mural of Candyman's mouth, and it's just such a striking image because it's kind of there's a lot you could read from it. There's the kind of mouth of hell connotations. It's kind of there's an element of the idea she doesn't realize the danger she's in. She has no idea what she's kind of getting herself into. And I think especially just because you've got Bernadette on the other side doing the typical what everyone else is doing of get out of there. So yeah, for me, I'd probably say that section's the creepiest. And then maybe on a more human level, like I said, the scene when she's with the female police officer who's being very cold with her and just kind of take them off and that, that's kind of creepy on a more kind of excuse me, on a more kind of human level, I suppose, and on a kind of relatable level, how kind of vulnerable she must be in that situation.
Yeah, she got that actress hired because it's her friend, because she felt more comfortable in that scene taking off her bra with somebody she knew than some other strange actress or actor or something. So that's why she got her friend the role for that section. For me, I think just the effects that he has on her, and I think it's the sections where she is mesmerized or hypnotized. I think that first meeting is kind of overwhelming. It's unsettling, and again, he doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to do. All he says is, this is me. This is who I am, and I'm here. And you doubted me. You doubted me, and that's why I've come. But yeah, any of those moments where she's just her eyes are just kind of glazed over, and she's in that kind of fugue state or whatever it is. For me, those are the ones that really kind of it gives it this. It adds another layer to an already well acted film. I think those moments.
Yeah, it's really haunting.
Yeah, absolutely. She has no power. She's compelled to listen to do what he says, and she's all of her agency is taken away in those moments, and it's she's stood still. She's a statue. She can't do anything, and again, because of the real hypnotism in that, it just compounds that feeling. But yes, and she says as well. Ria says, "Why do you think it still resonates today?"
I mean, obviously, like we've said, I think the kind of racial elements of the film are kind of more and more prevalent than they should be nowadays. But I think beyond that, I think it's just a very classic story. at the end of the day, like we said, it is much more in the genre of like gothic romance in a way than it is like your typical slasher film. You know, you can throw a stone for every Candyman and hit about 10 or 20 kind of like knockoffs where it's just like, bad man attacking women, blah, blah. But I think there is just something so tragic and kind of genuinely romantic about this one that just like it makes it completely stand on its own. And I think I think like you said, it almost seems a shame to big up Tony Todd so much, because I think Virginia Madsen, she is the workhorse in this, as Ray has pointed out. But I do just think he just gives such a kind of like complex performance. You've got this wonderful contrast of him being this really imposing, domineering figure, but he just has this gorgeous voice and these like lovely expressive eyes and everything. So there's just something so captivating about the whole thing. I think the whole film itself does have this really like haunting kind of seductive quality. So, and I think it's hard to not be affected by that. So yeah, I think it's kind of no wonder that it stood the test of time. I
agree. It kind of updates and modernizes those kind of classical monsters, those classical ideas, the romance, the gothic horror. And again, it modernizes it, adds its own kind of political, injects the politics of the day and the continued politics of America into that. And I think that's kind of, I don't know, there's something, probably all of the elements we talked about, I think, it just comes together and makes it something that kind of transcends maybe even film itself to a degree. It's something that people still talk about to this day, or, people don't say, Candyman in the mirror 5 times. I barely even say it once. And I think that's going to come up in the comments again. So we'll move on to Tony Farina. I would like you to contemplate on why Tony Todd wasn't a bigger star.
Interesting. Yeah, because that is a good point. Because he does kind of feel like one of these people who like, I think there is a reverence around him, like people who are fans of his, like really are fans of his. And supposedly the word on the street is that apparently he's just the loveliest person as well. But yeah, like why? Because yeah, like obviously, like I said, if you take pretty much all of the horror elements out of this film, he definitely has the qualities of a leading man, I think.
He did the first remake of Night of the Living Dead. I don't know if there's been another one, but he was the lead in that. And he's great in that. As directed by Tom Savini, kind of updates and modernizes that classic film. And again, not a bad film either. Like not a bad remake as remakes go. But he's phenomenal in that one.
Yeah, because I mean the only other kind of like big budget thing I can think of that he's in is The Rock.
Yes, he is in Platoon as well. He plays...
okay, I've not seen Platoon.
Yeah, it's a very small part he has in Platoon. I'm pretty sure he dies, but he is in there with Forrest Whitaker and a few other guys as well. A lot of famous faces in that one. But yeah, I don't know if maybe we were quite ready for that. Maybe as a society, like
I think that is an element of it. I think that probably
they probably went, we have Denzel, we have Eddie Murphy, that's it, nobody else. We've got the funny guy.
Yeah, I mean, interesting you bringing up Eddie Murphy, the fact that Eddie Murphy almost got this role as well, and as much as I think he could have pulled it off. But yeah, I think and it is a shame that we kind of never got to see Tony Todd in more roles like this. And I suppose it's that classic thing of, is he just Candyman? Is that what people just instantly think of?
Yeah, I was going to say that as well.
Is it hard to kind of see him in any other capacity?
And I think initially as well, people said, you're not going to be able to shake this. This is going to define you. But then he said, let it define me. Like if I think this is worth doing, I think this is saying something important. So let's do it. And I think unfortunately, to a degree, he has struggled to shake it, maybe the typecasting of that. But again, a lot of actors who play these kind of mythic characters struggle to kind of shake off sort of that sometimes. So yeah, I think there's a whole lot of elements to it. Maybe there wasn't roles that in a lot of films because they were predominantly white as well. Maybe there wasn't a role for him. Like he's a big guy as well. Like he's a big guy, booming voice, he most likely would be cast as villains anyway. I think, for the most part. He was the Undertaker in Final Destination as well, and he was like, he kind of represents death in that as well. He kind of knows how death works and everything. So yeah, I think there's a lot of factors. I don't think there'll be one specifically, but he's gone on to do a lot of voice roles, and I think this is because of this film directly, absolutely. But yeah, and he also asks Tony, have you said Candyman in the mirror 5 times? The answer is no, Tony, for me.
Absolutely not. I wouldn't dare.
Why tempt fate? That's what I'm saying. Even if you believe it or you don't, why tempt fate?
I mean, I'm sure I can change him, but I'm not going to tempt fate that way.
Exactly. So another one, Scott Weatherly of the 20th Century Geek. He says, top 5 horror for me, a great adaptation of the ideas in The Forbidden, the concept of story and the telling of the legend being key to the Candyman's existence has always intrigued me. Is Candyman really Daniel Robitaille, or an entity that's latched onto that story? Tony Todd is charismatic and terrifying. The music is perfect. The ideas of placing the film in the Chicago projects adds American depth. All these ideas are extended in the Legacy sequel to cover how we express and tell the story through art and community.
Yep, spot
on. Yeah, can't argue with that, Scott. I think you've gone over a lot of stuff we've said. So Chris Phelps, he says, the reason I won't say Candyman 5 times in the mirror, even now, shows how great a job Tony Todd did. As a kid, it scared the shit out of me. Yeah, again, can't really argue with that. I don't think we've got much to add to that. So Max Burney says, the original film is awesome. The recent Legacy sequel is dull as shit. I don't think I agree with you on that, Max, as I think we've talked about. I think there's stuff to enjoy about that, but again, you're entitled to your opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anything, I kind of remember there's definitely some very tongue-in-cheek moments. Like spoilers. Like I'm sure when Anthony kind of finds out that there's been the murder in this in his art gallery, when our boy Clive gets his comeuppance, I'm sure there's a brilliant moment where he's kind of like excited by the prospect of like, oh, there's all the attention. I mean, it's horrible about the murder, and like, there was definitely moments where I remember there was like, oh, this is good. It's kind of injecting
there is some humor. Yeah, like Teyonah Parris's brother, who's young gay gentleman. He's like, he comes in, he's like trying to protect her when he's like, if you're in here, you better make yourself known. And she's like, shut up, you dickhead. And he's like, I'm gonna mess you up. I'm gonna fight you. And he's like, you wouldn't stand a chance. Look at him. The guy's Black Manta. You're not gonna have, he's the Candyman. You're not gonna have a chance. But yeah, so there is that. So John Hammond, he says, one of my favorite horror movies of the 90s. I'm of a certain age where I got to see this at the cinema and remember Tony Todd creeping me out. He's brilliant in the role. Always loved that the bees are real and he was paid sting money. The sequels don't pull off what the first one did, and the most recent Legacy sequel, as Max said, is dull as shit, which was a shame. Again, kind of disagree with you there, John. I think we've discussed that. But yes, next one. Only 3 more now. There's a lot. I've had to kind of cut some out because there were so many. So I Am Jack's Musings says, something about Clive Barker's horror really hits my psyche. I find images from both Hellraiser and Candyman have stayed with me ever since watching them for the first time in the 90s as a teen. So much so, I've been fearful to return and never said, he who shall not be named 5 times whilst looking in the mirror. No chance. So yeah, that deeply affected Jack as well. Sounds like everyone's been like deeply affected by this film.
I don't think I've ever met anybody who has tried it, which I think says something in itself too.
Absolutely, 100%. Okay, so Maffey says Tony Todd is one of those actors that will always make you feel uneasy when you see him. Add a hook for a hand and the supernatural, and you're going to be creeped out and scared. Can't argue with that. And our final comment, Dan Keatis, he says, I recently picked up the Arrow 4K Blu-ray of this and forgot how hard it hits. The visceral horror and the social commentary are as biting today as they were in 1992. I've not seen any of the sequels other than Nia DaCosta's 2021 film, which I thought was excellent.
Hey.
So somebody likes it out there. Somebody.
There are dozens of us.
I know Tony does. I know Scott does. Scott likes it as well. So it's a very divisive film, I think, the 2021 one.
Which even in itself, like, I would far rather something be divisive and get people talking than just people be like, it's fine.
Absolutely, yeah. Like we're that's what we're here to discuss. We're here to talk about stuff. So yeah, really, I enjoyed it. But Sarah, we have finally come to an end on our Candyman saga has come to an end. Is there anything else you'd like to say, or do you want to give people your social media handles and where they can find you?
Yes, so I have recently left Twitter because Elon Musk is bad.
That's
but
fair.
You can still find me on Instagram. I'm at Sarah Coyne 92. Like I said, I am about as old as this film. And yeah, thank you very much for having me. I've had a great time talking about it.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought it up, and I'm so glad the patrons picked this one as well. Like all the other choices would have been great, but this one I was so glad I got to revisit again. Like, and again, I could have kind of, go past those childhood fears again and kind of brave it again. And it was wonderful to do so. And again, I like the Legacy sequel as well. So yeah, I had an absolute blast. So yeah. Right, so that's it. That's us. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. And you can find me at www.spiderdanandthesecretboars.com. Please subscribe to the Pop Culture Collective newsletter to find out what myself, Comics in Motion, and all the other related podcasts are up to week by week. I'd like to thank my patrons on Patreon. I am Jack's Musings, Simon Cotton, Paul Mellon, Mike Byrne, Angry Andy, Tonya Todd, Tony Farina, Math, Scott Hodgson, and Ria Carrigan for their continuing donations. It is very much appreciated and helps Prattle World keep on turning. And if you ever find yourself in a position to help the podcast, please consider it. Thank you very much again, Sarah. I know you're not all that well, and now I can barely see you because it's gotten very dark. We've been talking about
I didn't factor in the fact that the sun goes down at some point if you only have natural lighting.
Exactly. No, it was kind of atmospheric, so it kind of felt like, ooh, it's a little spooky. But thank you very much. I know we've been talking for a little while, but this has been amazing, and I'm sure you'll be on again to talk about something else very, very soon.
Fingers crossed.
And I won't be saying your name 5 times in the mirror either.